May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts always be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Please be seated. You'll be aware I normally preach from the centre, but realised as I was in the sacristy that I'd set the camera up to be here, so that's where I am. We did joke that if you go in the pulpit, is that phrase, you're 6 feet above contradiction. Well, I'm only 6 inches actually today. That's not to say one can never comment or give their thoughts on a sermon. But today is a challenging message. It is a challenging message, which opens with in the book of Hebrews, do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing that some have entertained angels without knowing it. Showing hospitality to strangers in a continuation of mutual love. That's difficult, isn't it? This teaching of hospitality comes from the heart of Jesus, who was not frightened at all to open his heart, his spirit, his life to all sorts of people. Strangers who were wealthy, strangers who were very poor. He engaged with all sorts of strangers, meeting them with compassion. People who were considered untouchable, lepers, prostitutes, tax collectors, the blind, the lame, the poor and the powerless, widows and orphans, the hungry and the sick. And you might recall the parable in Matthew's Gospel of the sheep and the goats. It's called the Judgment of the Nations. And Jesus teaches that parable where the king says, I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. And you perhaps remember the Gospel of the encounter on the Emmaus Road with the risen Jesus, when 2 disciples are walking home from Jerusalem. And when they reached the village, as it was getting dark, they invited the stranger into their home to stay for the night. Of course, the stranger came to be revealed as the risen Jesus, and he disappeared from their sight. And there's a charity called Emmaus with bases all over the country supporting the homeless. Presumably, the 2 people welcoming the stranger in that gospel encounter is the inspiration for the name for the charity. Back in Jesus' time, it was a different world then, wasn't it? Perhaps it was more normal to invite strangers into your home. The advice I recall from my own school days was do not talk to strangers. I guess we've all been told that when we were growing up as well. When I'm out and about, and particularly in cities, and I see homeless people on the streets, under bridges, on the steps of churches, and I wonder, what on earth is their life story? How did life come to be for them that they're so completely dependent on the generosity of people passing by, dropping a few coins in the cup as they pass by? The parable we hear today is all about hospitality being unconditional, inviting those who cannot possibly repay us. What does hospitality look like today? Cast our mind back to earlier this week and that horrific incident in Minneapolis, where a stranger broke into a Catholic church during a mass. A gunman bursting into the church, taking the lives of 2 children and injuring many others. Hospitality is risky at the church's own doorstep, but it seems even in the context of the Eucharistic meal that Jesus gives us, some communities are never safe. In sleepy Knutsford, one hopes this is never a concern for us. But I'll always remember my first visit to a church in Johannesburg, where I arrived exactly at the time of the service starting and the doors were locked. I returned in the evening to find out that the doors had been locked because of fear of gunmen bursting into the church. Welcome to South Africa. So I find myself a little bit more cautious these days with strangers. And on our return visit to Paris a couple of weeks ago, I discovered very quickly after leaving the underground that my wallet had been stolen. A little bit of stupidness on my part when my guard had just dropped a little and I was taken advantage of. Fortunately, I discovered the theft very quickly and I was able to stop any payments being taken. On future journeys across the city, I became extremely vigilant and even resorted on one occasion to a longer bus trip across the city. It felt safer to be overground rather than underground. I guess many of us have been in this sort of situation in some way when we've been taken advantage of, compromised, and we felt violated by a complete stranger. So yes, I'm wary of strangers. Trust has to be gained. Next door in the vicarage, when that knocker goes or the doorbell, there's a peephole, and I'll look through that to try and see who is on the other side. How am I to approach this if it's a stranger? I cannot be reckless with my own safety or with anyone else in the context of the hospitality of the church. Sensible precautions should always be taken. So what I'm saying is, when we read these passages today, that there is a tension offering hospitality. The love of Jesus within us, wanting to welcome anyone and everyone. But we want to be safe too. I wonder how the parish priest of churches in the United States move forward with wanting to offer hospitality to welcome those who cannot repay them. And at a national level, very much in our news at the moment, there is another tension, isn't there? The numbers of people crossing the English Channel. They have already made a long, risky journey just to get to northern France. It's a huge risk. No guarantees of a safe crossing, plunging financial resources into something that may not even deliver what they desire. I'm not making a political statement here at all. I merely say what I think Jesus would say. I can only imagine that if I were taking those same steps, then I'd have to be pretty desperate to do it. There are serious practical issues that our government must consider. Access to healthcare systems, public services, and so on. And we do have an ageing, more dependent population. But whatever decisions are made should be done with compassion, remembering that we are all children of God. We may feel some difficulty ourselves, and especially if we live in a community that's more affected. And yet, I hear those words from Jesus, wondering and then knowing what his mind is in this. I'm challenged by him. It's perhaps a little remote for us, but if you've come face to face with such people, and I have stood face to face with people making those journeys in Lesbos, in Greece, 10 years ago, seeing a human face directly, speaking to these people, and when you actually meet a person in that situation, it makes it much, much harder to close the door of the heart. As the former Archbishop Rowan Williams wrote in The Guardian this weekend, the tragedy of this refugee controversy is that ordinary people outside hotels are raging at ordinary people inside them. What is the mind of Christ? Hospitality of the kind that Jesus wants us to offer challenges us. It's not so much about opening the door of a house, which isn't practical or safe, but it's about our general approach in life, isn't it? Refraining from closing the door of our own heart to the needs of others, and not to close our heart to the love of God. How, as church, can we be hospitable? In the world that we live in, with a low level of religious literacy in our own country, I think an important factor in helping to address that is to enable our churches and halls to be as open as possible for use by the wider community. Surely that is the inspiration behind why we welcomed Hope Central on a Monday into our church hall. They are very much people who cannot repay us. This is in itself hospitality to the stranger. I'd like to just close with some words from that first hymn we sang, which struck a chord with me as we sang this morning, Christ is made the sure foundation. In verse 3, hear the cry of all your people, what they ask and hope to gain, what they gain from you forever, with your chosen to retain, and hereafter in your glory, evermore with you to reign. Amen.